to eye, can we still see heart to heart? Let's talk about it. Learning to Disagree with John Inazu on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
And we are so glad you're here. I say it every time and mean it every time. You always have a seat at our table. We just don't let you talk. We've got a great program ahead. In case you were wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter, our executive producer, is here. Matthew never shies away from asking hard questions like, why in the world did I walk in this room? That's true. And our producer, Jeremy, is in the little glass booth. Jeremy will soon compete in a battle of the bands. I was pleased and excited until I heard they were using instruments. No brass knuckles, no chains, no broken bottles.
I mean, that actually changes my perspective, too. I'm going to go home and rethink this.
Our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in the tech bunker. John says wearable technology can now steer you toward healthy choices. John, wedding bands have been doing that for thousands of years. And Dr. George Bingham isn't here. He's out of town. And we are bereft when he doesn't show. Kathy Wyatt is the soft, feminine side of the program. Kathy loves meatloaf, bread, and wings, and a whole bunch of other musical acts from the 70s.
Oh, Matthew.
I don't write this. I read it, and I'm
That's
so
top
sorry.
shelf. Man, that is really premium product there, sir.
We have a great guest, and I've been reading his book this morning, John Inazu, and he serves as the Sally D. Danforth Distinguished. No, I'm not even going to say that. Sally D.
What?
Danforth. Well, I had thoughts, and I shouldn't have even gone there. Distinguished professor of law and religion at Washington University. He's authored several books, and his writing has appeared in the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, USA Today, and Newsweek. His latest book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is Learning to Disagree, the Surprising Path to Navigating Differences with Empathy and Respect. Actually, I didn't want to do this interview. You know, we've had a lot of publishers send us books on how to be nice and Christian, and I get tired of being nice and Christian. And I thought, I don't know if I can deal with one more book who tells me to be nice and Christian. Jesus didn't die to make me nice. But as I began to read this book, I thought, this is so good, and it's so different, and it's so real, you got to get it. And it's absolutely so timely. John, of course, is a lawyer, and he has to be reasonably civil in a courtroom. I have a lawyer friend who says he likes for me to get into trouble because we get to spend time together. I got him a job at a fairly large law firm, and a week later, the guy who was my friend who headed up the law firm fired him. And I called him my friend and said, what'd you do that for? And he said, well, he climbed over the rail yelling, you SOB, at the other side, and I just can't have that. So being a lawyer doesn't always make you civil, I guess. It certainly didn't him. John, the great thing about this book is that it's real and it's complicated. It's not a simple be nice kind of book. Your friend Trish Warren wrote in the preface or the introduction that you took simple things and made them complicated. And she, I think, made that as a compliment. I'm just not sure. You ought to check. But this is not as easy as be nice, is it?
It's not. And first of all, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be with all of you. No, it's not. It's not as simple as be nice, because life is not as simple as be nice, and living in a diverse democracy is not as simple as be nice. It's full of tragedy and hardship and compromise and the inability to compromise and the messiness of it all. And as Christians, we're stuck here as part of that as well.
Your book goes through a year of your life. And that's the thing that it makes real. It's where the rubber hits the road. I mean, it's really where you've lived, where you've gone, what you've done, and it's quite authentic. All right, what I have to change. I mean, I'm more like the lawyer who climbed over the rail and went after the other side. I want to go after somebody because I'm right and they're wrong. And if they don't get that, where does somebody like me start?
I think you start with me as well, which is, and part of the point of the book is we're all works in progress. You can think of this year in my life as a combination of what I teach in the classroom around hard subjects that raise major disagreements and culture wars issues, and then all of the screw ups I have in my own life, encountering, friends, family, and neighbors, and not always doing it well. So I think step one is we're all works in progress, and step two is jump into the mess and don't avoid it and work on getting better. There's no shortcut to any of this. So if you're asking me what to do, I think the answer is get busy practicing and hope for slow change.
We don't do that. I mean, we're in a culture where everybody is trying, unless you're on Twitter or X or one of those places that are sewers, where you go after everybody and say horrible things about them. But in terms of our personal relationships, one of the most dangerous things happening in our culture is that we have been reduced to talking about the weather and how pretty the flowers are, because we don't want to destroy relationships. And what you suggest, we do just the opposite. We bring up the uncomfortable subjects and talk about them. You can get killed doing that.
In some parts of the world, that's true. I think we can start by saying what a privilege it is to be in this country, or for most of the time, in most cases, that's not true, that you can actually talk about things that matter. And some of us just need more courage to do that. But, let me actually go back and say, way too many of us are spending way too much time online, and that's not cultivating these good practices. That's reducing everything to sound bites and snarks. So step one for a lot of us is to spend less time online. And then, to your point, we need to start talking about these issues at some point in the right context and with the right people. And those qualifiers are pretty important. Don't be God's spokesperson for every issue under the sun. The world does not need that.
Do you think that's a big mistake that we as Christians make? After all, it's God's revelation, and some of the most horrible things that have ever been said to others were said in God's name. And we have a tendency to say, if God said it, then it's got to be right. I believe it, so you're wrong. And that kind of arrogance is pretty damaging, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's forgetting half of the command to speak the truth in love. And it's also, I think, the reality that we put too much of the importance and responsibility on ourselves. It's Jesus who reveals and the Spirit who convicts. It's not Steve or John who make all of the, mic dropping moments that are going to change people's lives.
Isn't that true? That's good. We do a question and answer section of a teaching broadcast we do from here on Fridays. I do it with my former pastor, Pete Alwinson. And one of the things I say often is that we're doing our best, and 50% of what we're going to say in answer to your questions will be wrong. And we're just not sure which 50%, so you're probably going to have to get a Bible and do some reading and research and check for yourself. I've found that saying that diffuses a lot of anger. Do you think maybe that's because I'm so wise or because it's just true?
Well, I'm not going to be the one to opine on your wisdom, but I will say that you're modeling a kind of humility and a humility of knowledge, and that goes a long way in a world where things are hard and complex and often unknown.
Oh man, this is going to be a great. You guys, you don't want to go anywhere because this is not what you think. He's not going to just say smile and be nice because Jesus died to make you nice. This is real stuff on how to deal with real issues with people. And if we don't learn how to do that, we're going to be in serious trouble. The name of the book is Learning to Disagree, Surprising Path to Navigating Differences with Empathy and Respect. John Inazu is our guest, and he's a lawyer. I thought I'd tell some lawyer jokes, but I've decided against it, unless this thing really goes south. Stay with us. Hey, thanks for joining us. We're talking with John, and he's not in a zoo. I want to apologize for mispronouncing his name, Inazu. And listen, I'll get this. It just takes a while. I'm old. I'm doing the best I can. And John is a pleasant and besides he's trying to sell a book, so he's going to not call attention to it. John's latest book, by the way, and it is a great book. You need to get it. It's timely and it's realistic, and it's not one of those silly be nice books. It's called Learning to Disagree, The Surprising Path to Navigating Differences with Empathy and Respect.
John, in one of the parts of the book that's jumped out to me reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend just last week. In the book, you say, as much as possible, distinguish people from the ideas they hold. I was talking to this guy. He had written for a BBC radio drama series, and he mentioned the person who created it, and he's a very well-known writer. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I mean, that guy's really respected. He goes, yeah, he also just walked out on his family during COVID and just disappeared for 3 years. I'm like, oh. I'm like, well, sometimes you got to separate the art from the artist, which is easy enough to say, but there's times where you're like, woohoo, okay. It's easy to say that when it's easy, and then there's other situations. Can you tell us a little bit more about that idea of extricating one from the other?
Yeah, great question. I mean, for Christians, this is hard because we're told everybody is an image bearer. So there really are no limits to that idea where we're supposed to remember that about the person across from us. I think in practice, just there's not enough time in the day. I'm not going to spend time debating the neo-Nazi about why his views might be different or okay. But in most cases, we can actually separate the people from the ideas they hold. And we do this in our day-to-day, right? You and I live and work and play alongside people who hold lots of beliefs we think are deeply wrong and offensive, and we can still do the ordinary things of life with them. So as a practical matter, we can do this. We know it, we've demonstrated it for ourselves, and we just have to remember that in sort of the heat of the moment.
You do that on steroids if you're representing a criminal. And lawyers always say we live in a place where everybody has the right to representation. But frankly, if I were a defense lawyer, I'm not, it seems to me that there's some I'm just not going to go to court with and defend because they're indefensible.
Well, let me jump in and say I would be representing a defendant, not a criminal. The criminal comes after the verdict, so
Okay.
that's kind of an important point.
Well,
But
yeah,
I would
but in
also,
God's eyes, if they were a criminal, they were a criminal before. And if you know it, well, anyway, go ahead.
yeah, but well, I mean, one of the beautiful things about the law is, and especially in this country, is we do require and ask representation of everyone. That's part of what makes the system work. So in my area of the First Amendment, I mean, I'm going to defend the rights of anybody to speak and say really offensive and harmful things because it's how the system has to work. And for sure, those are people whose ideas I find abhorrent, but they're still people who deserve rights under our society.
And when we give it, we receive it, don't we? I mean, some of my views are considered abhorrent. Some of my views are offensive and certainly controversial. And if I'm going to give that, I expect it from others too. And doesn't that get in the way?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, not everyone's on board to defend everyone else's rights, so that complicates things too. But in a society as varied and diverse of ours, we're all going to hold beliefs that other people find very problematic and objectionable. And so just living in the world introduces us to that reality with the people around us.
Do you find putting these principles that you teach in the book, putting them into practice, really does diffuse hot and angry situations? I mean, are they things? I mean, this is a practical book in real life, and so you, as you say throughout the book, going through a year of your life, you apply these things. Is it surprising to you how well they work?
Well, surprising to me when they work and surprising to me when they don't work. But, I think in a broader sense, this is what the law is. The law is a way for us to resolve disagreements through a kind of constrained discourse as an alternative to resolving those disagreements through violence. So that's a very good thing that we have that in place. In the classroom, when I teach the law, is an opportunity to have a more extended conversation about hard things that don't go so well on Twitter. So in some ways, these are the steps and the vehicles to have more measured and more longer term conversations. And then how do you go apply those in everyday life? Well, that's sort of the point of the book. I think it's possible, but it takes work, and it's not always going to work out the way we hope.
Yeah. Does being a Christian make a difference? I mean, my brother, who was the district attorney, used to get angry when my mother would say to him, "I'm glad you're a lawyer. We need Christian lawyers." And he would go ballistic, and he'd say, "You don't say we need Christian preachers or Christian doctors or Christian garbage collectors, only Christian lawyers." So maybe that adjective isn't so good, but you are that. You're a lawyer, you're a professor, you're a Christian. Does being a Christian make a difference in these kinds of areas?
I think it's certainly possible for people of all faiths and no faiths to engage well across disagreement. And this particular book is written to that broad audience. It's not a Christian book on its own terms. But I think for me as a Christian, to have the resources of the fruits of the Spirit and the virtues of faith, hope, and love, and the promise of things to come, that matters a great deal in my ordinary disagreements with other people. So absolutely, I think it is important in my own vocation and work. And then I guess the other thing I'd add here is I do want Christian lawyers, but these days I also want Christian preachers, because I'm not always sure that that's a given anymore either. So
That's true.
I sometimes doubt if I am. I have a lot of people who doubt my salvation, but you have something else too. The one you purport to follow doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room in what he requires of you. And if you're not a Christian, Katie, bar the door. You can get your gun out or your knife and say whatever you want to say without even feeling guilty about it. So there is the guilt factor of, am I doing this the way he told me to do it? Which I suppose is a good motivation, you think?
Well, there's that, and then I think also forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a suggestion, it's a command, and that goes a long way in our society.
Boy, it really does. And it's not as easy as a lot of people think that it is. And if you thinking being civil in this kind of fiery culture is easy, you're crazy. And this book will be honest about that and will be helpful in helping you have a reasonable Thanksgiving next year when the Democrats and the Republicans and the Baptists and the Episcopalians eat turkey together. The name of the book is Learning to Disagree, The Surprising Path to Navigating Differences with Empathy and Respect. Guys, we're going to come back. I don't care what you think. Just like Jesus. Don't go anywhere. Hey, we're so glad you're here. That you would give an hour of a busy schedule to us is a high and holy compliment. We're hanging out with John Inazu. You can keep up with John at Jinazu. You probably never met anybody with that name. It is a cool name, especially for those of us who have a name like Brown. It doesn't get any more pedestrian. JINAZU.com and on X, formerly Twitter, at his name, John INAZU.
John, when I was growing up, I had a delightful grandmother who was one of the easiest people in the world to get along with. She was that kind of person that just kind of walked down the road, never caused a problem, never got in a argument or confrontation with anybody. And I didn't take after her side of the family at all. And I remember her one time saying to me, Kathy, sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. And as I got older, it sort of seemed to me that what she was saying and that what the philosophy with that was that sometimes you have to adapt to a neutral road. You have to be on a neutral road of some kind. And in this day and age, with everything that deals with social media, it is virtually impossible. You can be neutral. You just stay off of all that stuff. But once you put an opinion in, even if it's a reasonably cogent opinion, they come out of the woodwork. And I noticed when I was going through your book today that one of your chapters deals with, can anything really be neutral? Could you expand on that a little bit? Because I don't know how you maintain, a measure of neutrality, except to just keep your mouth shut.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you've hit on the main point here, which is you can't be neutral about most things in life. The classroom is not neutral, books are not neutral, your beliefs on law or policy are not neutral. So you go into the world recognizing that this isn't a neutral claim, but it's reflecting some facts, some values, some life experiences, and that's how you begin conversation. But that's going to lead to friction and tension, and then you have to decide: are you going to continue to engage, or are you going to stop engaging? I worry a little bit about the agreeing to disagree mantra
Yes.
in that it's usually said passive aggressively.
Exactly.
We'll just agree to disagree, but actually, I think learning to disagree is something slightly different. It's figuring out how to have that mode of discourse, not achieving consensus, but learning what the disagreement is and how to do it.
I agree with you. We got to develop empathy. That sounds good. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, part of empathy is recognizing its limits. I'm not fully going to understand what it's like to live in someone else's shoes, someone of a different race or gender or background, and that's okay. So recognizing my own limits to understanding, but to the extent that I can, it's giving the best possible version of another human being or the arguments they hold. And that takes practice, but it allows you to have a real conversation over real issues, not straw men. And it also makes you think more deeply about what you really believe, which I think all of us ought to be doing more of.
Your approach on this book reminded me of the best fight I ever had with my wife. And not being ironic. The thought occurred to me, like everybody, every husband and wife gets in fights. I'm like, what if I'm not supposed to fight less? What if I need to focus on fighting better? And so I really had that in mind, and we had some disagreement. I can't even remember what it's about. It was that important.
You were wrong.
I'm sure I was wrong, but I didn't back down, but I was respectful, but like passionate, and she pushed back as well. And I'm like, oh, okay. And like 5 minutes, we circle back around. I'm like, I think that was a really good fight. What do you think? She's like, yeah, that really was. I'm like, huh. And I feel like that's something where like we're not going to magically find common ground on everything, but we can learn to disagree better. Kind of expanding on what Steve just said, are there kind of some practical ways that these hard conversations that we can handle them in a more healthy and respectful kind of way? And we might,
on
the other side.
Go in with a full tank, right? Go in if you find yourself getting into a tense moment, step back and say, am I ready for this moment now? Do I have the capacity to engage emotionally? Can I be patient? Can I listen? And if the answer is no, kind of, maybe set it aside for a bit. Because I think a lot of us, once we move from the cognitive to the emotional, and that's driving things don't go as well. I'm glad to hear, though, you thought about this with the context of your wife, because I will say that in the made-up Amazon categories for books, that my book was for a brief period of time #1 in the category of dysfunctional relationships. So I think there's a lot of opportunity
on the
out there
macro
for
level.
everyone.
Yes, that's great. Well, now it's #1 in jurisprudence. I saw. So
How about that?
You're just crushing it, John.
Much smaller tent.
Listen, John, we don't have time in this segment because we're running out of time, but I'd be interested when we get through the break to find out if there are just a lot of red herrings that we really don't understand what is being said that ticks us off so much. And if we could learn to hear and listen and maybe say, this is what I hear you saying more, we might be better off. But then again, maybe not. I mean, sometimes if I really understood what the person was saying, I'd be a lot more angry than I already am. But we'll see on the other side of the break. The book is Learning to Disagree, the surprising path to navigating differences and empathy and respect. Thanks for spending time with us. By the way, if you haven't yet subscribed to the weekly Key Life email, you're missing out. So while you're thinking about it, go to keylife.org/subscribe. And you say, how much is that going to cost me? Nothing. It's free. And we do that on purpose because you have a tendency to have a critical spirit. And if you get it free, you can't be critical.
Always thinking.
There you go. Always thinking. John, on the other side of the break, I was bringing up not understanding what the other person says. Is there a way to diffuse? Can you say, look, let me tell you what I think you're saying before I say anything? Does that work, or am I dreaming?
No, that's a great technique. And if you can summarize someone else's argument in a way that they understand and appreciate, then you've done a lot of the work of empathy. But I think related to this whole point too is a kind of humility to the limits of our knowledge. We're not experts in everything, and often we'll encounter people who know more than we do. So if we can listen for someone else's expertise, that can also help us recognize the complexity around us.
And we miss that, don't we? Because we're so angry. I mean, we it's not just that your book's going to help us from killing each other or keep us from killing each other. there are a lot of benefits that come. Friendships, knowledge, experience that others have had that we haven't, that we never get to because we're so sure they're wrong and we've demonized them.
John, I don't know if you talk about this in the book, but it came to mind. I had read something recently about a group of 9 individuals who have very diverse opinions, but they all work together at the Supreme Court. And it was talking about how, for as disparate as their beliefs and opinions and worldviews, they're a very close-knit group, and they get along. And, again, this might be something outside of what the book is, but it made me think about that ability to have that mutual respect that transcends differences. Is there something we can learn from them?
I think it's a great example, totally relevant to the book. 9 people whose jobs for life are to spend time with each other, to have lunch together, to spend hours talking about cases together. Contrast that to Congress right now, where people don't know each other at all, don't spend any time together. So you have a quite a useful contrast in those 2 different institutions at the federal government level. And so some people will say, well, the justices are just making this up for branding or to help the institution of the court. I guess you can believe that, but then you have to think that all 9 of them are in on the game, right? Either that or they actually are friends and they're working to do something different that might be a positive model for all of us.
That's good. You worked in the Pentagon for 3 or 4 years?
I did. Yep. I was commissioned into the Air Force and served as a lawyer for the Air Force General Counsel.
Are they civil there? I mean, they're
people.
They're paid to kill people. You know that, don't you?
Some of them are. That's true. Some of them are. A lot of support work too. I think it's the Pentagon's much more about the bureaucracy than it is the military. And in the bureaucracy, you have a lot of different offices fighting for power, and so civility can often be replaced with power grabs. But civility can still go a long way in making friends.
I wonder if in publishing the book, do you ever come across any pushback on the things that you're saying? You're like, oh, you're talking about just kind of compromising what I believe to get along, or is there any kind of general, counter argument that you get from the ideas that you're putting forth in this thing, and how do you respond to
Oh,
those?
sure, all the time. Yeah, I mean, because you think about like the fact of the world is we live in a very diverse democracy where people hold beliefs over things that matter, and they're different and they're not going away. So the question is, what do you do about it? You can just withdraw from each other. You can try something like what I'm suggesting of learning how to disagree, or you can fight to win at all costs and hope you maintain power. And there are a lot of people in this country, both left and right, who are choosing option 3, trying to maintain power. And those people are not interested in what I have to say, and they think I'm naive and hopeless. But that's okay, because I don't think we need them to make democracy work. We just need to minimize their influence.
Do you think that's the majority or just a very loud minority?
It's not the majority. It's a loud minority, but it's disparate left and right. So I think on the left, it's much more centralized in elite sectors of higher ed and journalism with fewer numbers, and on the right, it's much more populist but broader. And so there's a asymmetry of where it lies. But again, we don't need all of those people to make democracy work. We just need to model something different.
You, each of your chapters has to do with a month of your life. And the stories are absolutely great. But each chapter has a question. And for people like us, for a living, we ask questions of people like you. It makes for some good show prep. So one of the questions is, can we trust faith? And more important, can you trust telling people that you have faith without getting killed?
I think in today's culture, the real possibility and opening for people of faith and Christians is to point out that everybody has faith in something. It might be God or some religious faith, it might be yourself, or it might be the country, but we all have faith in something, and we all live our lives trusting in that faith, for good or for bad. So we start with the common baseline that we're all just kind of scrambling along, trying to make it work. And then we can talk about whose account of faith is more persuasive, more compelling, more exciting. And I find once you get to those conversations, there's a lot of the gospel that does its own work, that takes care of itself in terms of its compelling nature.
And in fact, properly understood, it can be quite winsome, and it can diffuse hot situations. George Bingham, who isn't with us today, during the Black Lives Matter controversy, if you said white lives matter too, you're going to be in serious trouble. And George said what you need to say is that you matter. You matter to me, and you matter to God. That's a pretty kind, generous, loving thing to say, and it's particularly Christian.
Yeah, and it's a reminder, back to what we were saying earlier in the show, that everybody is an image bearer. And as Christians, we can't lose sight of that. And if you're shouting at someone, you're often in danger of losing sight of that.
John, we have 30 seconds. Do you have a word of wisdom for us that will change our lives?
I mean, I'm a
Closing
lawyer,
arguments.
so it'd be much more than one word, right? But no, I would just say, if you're able to pick up the book, I've got a reflection guide at the end, and I would say read this in a community of people, because it's with other people that we learn how to disagree and we work on these hard practices together.
Oh, man. John,
sure.
Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you so much for writing this book, Learning to Disagree. You've got to get it, because it's not what you think. A lot of these books are just pablum, and this book isn't. It's real. It recognizes convictions, the importance of disagreeing, and it's very, very practical. John, we rise up and call you blessed for having written this book, and you get 3 free sins for having spent this time with us. Use them carefully. I have it on good authority that you're way behind. Guys, we're going to come back and tell you who we're going to do it unto next week. So you sit there and don't go anywhere. What a great hour. John's, that's a good book. And it's really a helpful one. And we need it as Christians. If you're not a Christian, you probably need it too. And he wrote it for you. But he did it mostly for us, because we live in a culture where it's dangerous to express your religious convictions. And if we don't do it, we're going to be in serious trouble. As a matter of fact, the best thing you can do in our particular culture is join a church, express your convictions in the places where you live, and to do it winsomely. And if we're silent, it's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse. And so we got to learn how to speak forth truth that we've been given. And we didn't dream it up. It was given to us. And to speak it kindly and with mercy and with compassion and with love. And this book will help you do it. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to be a much nicer person.
Okay.
From now on, because of and if you
Starting now.
oh well, it's kind of like New Year's resolutions. If you can get to February without messing it up too bad, you've done good. Kathy, who's going to be on next
It's
week?
not fair for you to say something like that and then expect me to say something. Next week, our illustrious executive producer, Matthew Porter, will be sitting in the chair interviewing with the rest of us, Leah Payne, on her book, God Gave Rock and Roll to You, A History of Contemporary Christian Music. And I do have to confess, we actually have already done this.
Have you already?
It was absolutely superb, just superb.
She's delightful. It's really great. Really
And
great
Matthew, may I just tell everybody, Matthew hit every single post.
Well,
Every single
man.
post. He's
learn from the best.
Steve, I think you need to just be
You all need
paying
to
a
know
little more
that
attention.
anytime they talk about film or culture, they make me get out of the studio. It's not because I don't know anything about it. I know more than they do. They just don't like to be shamed.
That's it.
And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. I'm looking forward to that program. I've heard
great
y'all talking
program.
about it. Okay, we're gone. Stick a fork in us. We're done. But we're going to come back next week and do it again. And it's our fond hope that you join us. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.
I really didn't know where to go with it. No, but I thought the back.